Okay, I think we can get started now. So we have about 10 minutes of opening welcomes, and that's going to be by Louisa Emmons, Joseph Wiggins, and myself. And Louisa is going to start.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. It's a great pleasure to have you all here at the Mesa Lab. Thanks you all for coming. I'm a senior scientist in the Atmospheric Chemistry Observations and Modeling Lab here at NCAR, and I've known Brad and Tracy Holloway for many years, so I was really happy to be able to help out hosting this workshop. Some logistics about the Mesa Lab. So this whole lobby area out front is public, and you're welcome to wander around and see some of the exhibits that highlight research going on at NCAR, as well as educational, a lot of activities and things. A lot of school groups come for field trips. And there's a nice little trail we call a weather trail out the back. So you can walk around the front, around the back. If you're ready for a longer hike, you can go off down the hill and climb the mountains. There are bathrooms on either side of the lobby. So down off to the left on the first floor and the second floor, and also down to the right. We'll be having a coffee break at 10:15. There'll be food and coffee out in the lobby here and reception later this evening. And we will have lunch in the cafeteria, which is through the lobby. I'll tell you before lunch. Follow the crowds down there. Also in the lobby, I want to say there's a little exhibit about the building and IM Pay's designing of this Mesa Lab. So look for that off around the corner. And anything else? I think that's it. Look forward to hearing. This is a very, very different conference than I've helped organize in the past. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Thanks, Louisa. Okay, so I'm Brad Pierce. I'm at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I'm the director of the Space Science and Engineering Center there. So my interest is very much satellites. Madison is the birthplace of satellite meteorology, and we're very proud of that. So welcome to the Energy, Fire, and Changing Landscapes Satellite Applications workshop. And as Louisa said, this is kind of unique in terms of workshops that we put on, where we're trying to really start a dialogue between industry and academic and the federal government in terms of what we can do to mitigate fire, use satellite data to help improve that, and in particular think about how we can better understand what the needs of industry are and the communities in terms of how we can respond to this, because it's clearly a big issue. This workshop series is funded by NASA. It is sponsored by the University of Wisconsin Energy Analysis and Policy Program, by NCAR, and also by Howard University. This is the second in a series of 4 workshops. The first one we had last year, which was a broad brush sort of discussion over 3 days about all sorts of satellite applications for energy. This is one now focused on fires, and particularly fires in the Western US, and that's why it's been convened here at NCAR. The objective is to focus on how satellite data can be used to improve our management of wildfires and energy infrastructure in a changing climate. And so that's sort of the dialogue that I'd like to see us start engaging in. And what I'd like to do now is introduce my co-chair, Joseph Wilkins from Howard University.
Thank you, Brad. Hey, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. So I'm Joseph Wilkins. I'm an assistant professor at Howard University in the atmospheric science program. I've been working with folks like Brad and NASA for quite some bit of time. Come from the government sector, where we're working with the EPA as well as the Forest Service on wildfire related issues. So the reason, first I'd like to say we all have a why for why we're in this room. And our particular why is that wildfires are kind of growing out of hand, for lack of a better term. And so these things are continuing to grow over the last 10, 20, 30 years, and it's going to only get worse as climate change wages on. So we have to try to come up with the remedies and the mitigation factors for how we're going to approach this. So this is kind of why we're all gathered here today. And so I would be remiss if I didn't speak about the recent events that just happened, such as in Canada, where we have over 30 million acres plus that just recently burned, which caused smoke to cover about 90% of the United States, as well as many other factors affecting people. So this is a recent thing as well as what happened in Maui, which is a little bit more pervasive as we have a lot of human life that was lost. Many wildfires we know can cause this, but this is one of the worst that we've had, and since about 10 worse since 1897, sorry. So think about the pervasiveness of this situation and the severity of this situation, and whether you believe the cause is human cause or not is irrelevant. It's something that we all have to address. And so we bring together our partners from different parts of this because fires can be caused by many different things, but about 90% of the causes of fire are human caused. So this is something that we can do something about and something we need to learn to live with. So.
Okay, and we'll close out this introductory section with just sort of a discussion of the workshop structure, which I will hopefully be able to get to. There. Okay, so on the main web page, we've got a description of all the panels. There's going to be 6 panels. The first, and with the structure of these panels is short introduction by each one of the panelists, kind of emphasize who they are, what they do, and what their concerns are. And then a significant amount of time for audience discussion. So I invite everyone to ask questions. This is very much an audience participation kind of workshop. It's for many of the researchers. I see all sorts of NCAR folks here and people from all over the country to ask industry what are your needs and how can we in the research community help. The first 3 panels, which are industry perspective, community impacts, and then observations, sort of set the stage for the rest of the workshop. Those are the broad overviews so that we're all kind of on the same page about what the issues are and what's available. And then the next 3 panels focus on specific topics within those. So there's going to be some redundancy, but hopefully we'll be drilling down by the end of tomorrow. And then we end with early career flash talks. So these are opportunities from some of our early career scientists and engineers to look at emerging research and new tools that are being developed and a look towards the future. So with that, we will start the first panel. So the goal of this panel 1 is industry perspectives. It's composed of all industry representation. And the goals is to, with a focus on Western utilities, what are the current and future needs and concerns, need for new technologies, tools, skill sets, aging infrastructure, increased sensitivity, intensity and frequency of wildfires, and what do we need to do to prepare for a more resilient power system. So Joe and I are the moderators, and I would like to have our panelists come up now to the front.
So while we wait for they to come up, I want everybody to think in this room of what would you like to see from something like this going forward? What are the mitigation factors that you think are important? Try to capture that over this 1.5 days time, and we will have a discussion at the conclusion of this so we can all partner and go forward. So keep those in mind, whether you send it to us in an email or speak it out loud. We want to capture everything that are thoughts of this room. So.
And I'd like to just confirm that Wade Ward is online and can hear us.
I am,
okay.
Thank you.
Excellent, good, perfect, okay. So we'll just go in order of the panelists here. And so James, did you, trying to remember if you had slides?
I do, yeah, just
okay.
a couple.
Panel 1. Okay, so if you would like to come up and if you'd like to come up to the podium, you can go ahead and present. So this is a laser pointer and this can advance your slides. Right. Put it in.
All right, everybody hear me? All right, thank you. Excellent. So I appreciate the opportunity to come here today and represent one slice of industry perspective on this broader question and issue. I just have 3 slides I really want to address because I think they'll go a long way toward helping visualize or represent what I'm about to share with you today. All right, we're not in slide mode yet. Just a moment. So as we go through, so my name is James Hillegas-Elting, and I'm with the Bonneville Power Administration. I sit within our transmission planning group, and more specifically, the team that is responsible for asset management and wildfire. So we have two complementary areas that we oversee. I work very closely with folks throughout the agency, field services, engineering, operations. I'm a project manager, not an engineer or a scientist. So I'm the cat herder of the team to help put all this stuff together and organize various efforts that we have going on in the wildfire space. For just a brief bit here on who we are as an entity. So we are part of the federal government Department of Energy, a power marketing administration, and we market and transmit electricity throughout the US Pacific Northwest. So we are a transmission only organization. We don't have any generation or distribution assets. I put this slide together to try to convey at a high level the timeline of what we have in progress, how the year 2020 was such a watershed year for us in terms of where we were able to take all of these various activities, efforts that we've been doing for decades in many regards, and coalesce them into a centralized wildfire mitigation program and plan. And since that time, we have been maturing incrementally and advancing in a lot of different ways, including wildfire risk modeling, which we have been doing with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. And what are the things that we do in our wildfire risk modeling is we do annual wildfire risk throughout our service territory, focused on our transmission assets, and even more specifically, where we are concerned with public safety power shutoffs. So the proactive de-energization of assets to avoid the risk of wildfire. As you can imagine, I could speak for many minutes on all the various aspects in this slide, but I just wanted to give you a flash overview of what we have going on. So one of the main things with our trajectory here is, so we're currently producing annual wildfire risk models. Starting next year, we want to get to a place where we're going to be producing iterations, so quarterly updates on the annual cycle. And what we want to evolve into in the future is getting temporal looks that are out into the future. So where climate change is affecting the predictive abilities of the wildfire risk models. We also want to advance into weekly, daily, hourly, sub-hourly predictive. Again, I don't want to take too much time. Just wanted to give you a broad overview of what we have going on. And that is the perspective from my organization.
And well, next speaker, keeping it in line. Oh, wait, it's online. Got it. I think it's a PDF. So. All right, Wade, feel free to take it away.
Yeah, great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. Thanks for getting the slide up and working through the technical difficulties this morning. I appreciate the opportunity to be here virtually. I certainly would have loved to have been there in person. I told the organizers that there's everything about this that would make me want to come to Boulder. My wife is from Boulder and grew up just down the street from the entrance of NCAR right there. I also have some very good friends at the university there, and I'm also from Madison. So everything about it, I certainly wish I could be there, but time wouldn't allow. So I did create just one slide here just for y'all to look at while I'm talking. I hope that the intent there is really to just create more questions than answers. But I am the supervisor of fire mitigation here at APS. Arizona Public Services, the largest utility in Arizona. We have about 6,500 miles of transmission much of it which runs through publicly managed lands like the Forest Service, BLM, BIA, and state lands, as well as over 12,000 miles of overhead distribution. Those circuits range anywhere from a 20-foot right-of-way to a 120-foot right-of-way. So there's a lot of challenges. I think most people should be familiar with Arizona, but we go from the Sonoran Desert all the way up to Alpine country and the San Francisco Peaks and Flagstaff. So our jurisdiction and our vegetation types are extremely drastic and move very quickly through those transition zones. So I hope really, the intent here of the panel is to try to create more questions than answers in our 5-minute presentation, but certainly the biggest things that we have focused on over the last 8 years here at APS. And just to give you my background a little bit, I spent a full career in both wildland and structure firefighting, have a degree in fire science, and came to APS to start the fire mitigation program. So like most of us outside of California, we're evolving and constantly improving and trying to figure out new ways to both prevent, mitigate, and respond to the wildfire risk. And technology is a big piece of that. Some oversimplicity is removing the fuels, right? If we can remove part of the fire triangle into the mix, certainly removing fuels is the easiest, but not the easiest to do. It's vast and expensive, and not a lot of people want you to remove the trees. So technology is a big piece of it. We are heavily in the really research development and trying to figure out how to apply all of the science and technology into adding to our mitigation portfolio here at APS. The biggest ones are situational awareness, better understanding through weather stations, cameras, meteorology, fire intelligence. We just hired our second meteorologist here at APS in my group. So that person will be focusing on our fire potential modeling. And we're spending a lot of time and energy doing that right now, onboarding probably one of the largest companies, most sophisticated in that space into our program here. And we'll be up and running in 2024 to help us better understand and forecast not only short-term situational awareness, but long-term investments in other technology and better understanding the risk as we deal with climate change. My personal take on that is kind of two things that we often talk to customers, regulators, and even within our organization is that I don't care what you call it. I've been out fighting fire for over 23 years before coming to APS. And I could tell you that the transition zones in Arizona from high desert to alpine or mixed conifer forests are changing drastically. So we have to deal with it, like what was said earlier. And yeah, we're looking forward to discussing what that technology resources are and participating in the discussion today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Wade. Thank you. We'll move on to our next speaker. Duane.
Thanks. Thank you all for being here. I'm Duane Highley. I serve as CEO for Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association, which is a member-owned cooperative that serves 42 other utility members across 4 states. So we're a poorly named cooperative. Tri-State serves in 4 states. And we have those 42 utility members that we serve stretch from the Panhandle of Nebraska to Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico, all the way from the Montana border of Wyoming to the Mexican border with New Mexico. So about 200,000 square miles of the American West, an area larger than the state of California, but with a lot fewer people. So cooperatives tend to serve the most remote areas and some of the poorest people in the country. And that's our challenge, is to make sure we keep the lights on and keep power affordable. And that's why our nonprofit business model is important for that. I also serve as the co-chair of the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council. So Electric Subsector Coordinating Council is a public-private partnership, the principal liaison between federal government and utilities on electric power industry efforts to prepare for and respond to national level disasters, hurricanes, wildfires, threats to critical infrastructure, cybersecurity threats, physical security threats. That's what we work on in classified space with our partners in the federal government. Within the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council, we have something called the Wildfire Working Group. And that is a set of Western CEOs who are primarily focused on what we can do to mitigate issues with wildfire. And so we work at the policy level with cabinet level officials in the federal government. Literally this morning, just before walking into this room, I was on a call with Secretary Jennifer Granholm, the Secretary of Department of Energy, and a number of utility CEOs to discuss the Maui wildfire and the incident there, and raising awareness on the part of the federal government, what can be done to more quickly mitigate issues. And I'll just tell you all that when I mentioned this conference, the secretary said, please let me know what comes out of that, so that you all get an open ticket with the Secretary of Energy for us to provide feedback at the conclusion of the conference, or what are the areas where GRIP funding that is available through Department of Energy could make a difference in advancing the technology. And I know that's the purpose of this conference, is to talk about technology. So what could be done, and maybe we could get the secretary to put her thumb on the scale on where some of that federal money goes to help advance that research and application of those technologies. So we're intensely interested in. So we all know wildfires are a growing threat. And 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, December 2021, I sat on my deck and watched the Marshall Fire, which was just outside of us here. 1,000 homes burned in a very short period of time. Before the Maui incident, was probably one of the worst property damage fires in the history of the country. Now there's over $2 billion in claims, and 2 potential causes have been identified for that. One, perhaps a little trash pile burning that had been done at a place called 12 Tribes. It was kind of a little community center. And also possibly the potential that a power line from Xcel had possibly ignited the fire from the 100-mile-an-hour winds, and the conductor possibly causing a spark somewhere. So while the investigation's concluded after almost 2 years, and said there's not enough evidence for a criminal issue, for criminal liability, that doesn't stop 500 entities now from suing Xcel Corporation, and 150 insurance companies that's suing them under what they call mass tort negligence claims for billions of dollars. So as a result, you might find that Xcel ceases to exist in the same way that Portland Gas and Electric ceased. I'm not Portland, Pacific Gas and Electric went bankrupt with their fire incidents. And if you didn't notice, Hawaiian Electric has now had a 3-level credit downgrade by Wall Street. So that's pretty extreme. It just says that any one fire could be the end of a utility. And I'm not sure that's in the public interest either. We need to make sure, first of all, we don't have ignition, but also the negligence standard is so high. One of the issues we've been working with Bureau of Land Management on is their interpretation of what they call strict liability for utilities operating in national forests. Strict liability means whether you're negligent or not, you're guilty. So certainly utilities are willing to stand for a negligence standard. If we do a bad job maintaining our infrastructure, we should be liable for that. But if it's the presence of a line is determined to be by itself cause for liability, that means the end of utilities as we know it. I think it's a serious issue we're taking up, and hope to have some legislative relief on that. So as we watch what happens with Xcel, what's happened with PG&E, and what will happen with Hawaiian Electric, it just tells us how important this is. That loss of life, loss of property, it's happening more frequently, and it's a bad thing. So what can we do to stop that? Obviously, even today in California, Northern California, they're doing public safety shutoffs because of high winds being forecast. And the better we can get at that, where we have to do that less frequently, that would be a good thing. We've had instances where individuals who rely on wells to pump water, when the utility institutes the safety shutoff, then a fire ignites and they don't have a means of pumping water to protect their property. So again, we need to figure out ways to be better at that. I've mentioned the liability issue. Also, just permits to get into the federal forests have been very problematic. One of our purposes of our call this morning was to encourage more rapid permits to go and do vegetation management, right-of-way management. When we want to go in and harden infrastructure and maybe replace wood poles with steel or widen right-of-ways, we end up running into a permitting bottleneck that can take years. And there have been instances where the utility has identified danger trees and the need to get in and take them out. And before we get the permits to do that, fires have occurred. So we need to work better on that as well. Lots of issues for us. It's my pleasure to be here with this morning, and I'd be happy to take any questions on behalf of industry or the electric subsector coordinating council. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We'll have our final speaker for this session, Branden.
Great. Thank you, Joe. And it's good to be with you this morning. So the power industry is facing a lot of unprecedented challenges, and we're talking about one of those today. And I just wanted to say it's good to be in a conference standing in front of a group of people that I don't recognize. It means that we're bringing more skill sets, we're bringing more talent in to help us solve some of these challenges. And we're gonna dig really deep into one specific one throughout the course of the next 2 days. But just know that it is great to see you all here and engaging in these conversations, because this is how serious problems get solved, is through the collective efforts of a lot of really smart people. So good to be here with you today. So my name is Branden Sudduth. I'm the Vice President of Reliability Planning and Performance Analysis for the Western Electricity Coordinating Council. And I know that was a lot of words. Essentially what we do is our primary focus is reliability, security, and resilience for the Western Interconnection. The Western Interconnection is the power system that covers all or part of 14 Western US states. It goes into the provinces of Alberta and British Columbia and kind of down into Mexico in the Baja Peninsula. So all of that is one synchronous machine. And when something happens in one part of the system, it can affect other parts of the system too. And so that kind of brings me to this focus on reliability. So at WECC, I'll shorten that to WECC. At WECC, every couple of years, we sit back with our stakeholders, a lot of industry representation, but we also have representation from state regulators, commissions, governor energy offices, and others. We all sit back and we try and identify what we think are the biggest threats to the reliability of the bulk power system. And we did this a couple of years ago, and we came up with 4. The number one, and these aren't in any particular order, but number 1 was cybersecurity. And I think all of us can appreciate the complexity and the magnitude of cyber security, cyber threats at this time. Number 2 was extreme natural events. And so over the last 3-4 years within the Western Interconnection, we've seen unprecedented weather events happening. Starting in August of 2020, we saw a wide area heat wave that pretty much enveloped most of the Western US. And this created a lot of challenges from a power systems perspective. The way that the grid is designed and built, we really rely on geographical diversity. We rely on resource diversity. And when one particular area of the interconnection is struggling, maybe they have really high demand at one point in time because of heat, typically we can rely on other parts of the grid to provide needed energy during that time. The challenge with wide area heat waves is you don't get that kind of diversity. When everybody has high demand for power, it puts you in a pinch. The other thing that we've been seeing with these extreme weather events is they don't happen in isolation. Like we don't just have a wide area heat wave event and we don't have to worry about droughts or wildfires, or we don't just have a drought situation. Typically, you see a wide area heat wave event at the same time that you have massive wildfires roaring across, wide areas, at the same time that you have massive droughts. And so a lot of these challenges compound on top of each other. And so it's super critical that we get behind each of these challenges, not only individually, but collectively. And I'll talk about wildfires for just a second. I was part of the planning committee for this conference, and we talked a lot about, how the industry views wildfires, how it responds to wildfires, how wildfires affect the way that utility planning and operations occur. And there's a lot of different ways that happens. One way is that they want to be aware of what's happening in the field. And so utility operations are constantly monitoring the situation. And at WECC, we actually have a wildfire dashboard on our website that shows you all of the current burning fires in the West. We get the data from public sources and provide that just to give that wide area snapshot of what's happening. And that's extremely important information for utility operators, because they want to know if there's fires encroaching on their transmission lines, fires encroaching on distribution lines, because they might need to take necessary action to reroute power, or to understand, if we lose a line or a set of lines, how does that affect our ability to serve our customers? So that's one element of fire in consideration by utilities. Another area you've heard a little bit about today is the threat of causing wildfires. And so a lot of utilities have adopted things, they go by various names, but public safety power shutoffs is probably the most common term that's being used today. And this is utilities monitoring climate conditions. If it gets too windy, and if the humidity in the air is too dry, if things are kind of ripe for wildfires, they will sometimes proactively de-energize lines to reduce the risk of their facilities causing wildfires. So that's another way that utilities kind of look at wildfires and wildfire prevention. And then the other piece that I just wanted to bring up, and this really gets into my background. So I'm an engineer, spent a lot of my time doing power system modeling and planning. And so another thing that we're starting to look more at is, okay, how do wildfires affect the way that we look and plan the power grid? Used to just be that we talked a lot about reliability, and resilience was just this kind of thing that, some people thought about, but it was, planning for major hurricanes or, wide area events that affected a lot of transmission generation facilities simultaneously. But the more we experience these extreme weather events, the more it's coming clear to me that we need to consider the effects of wide area wildfires, taking out multiple transmission lines, taking out generation. A new term I heard the other day was smoke domes. So when you have massive wildfires, they can create a layer of smoke that can impact the availability of solar resources. And as a utility planner, we need to be thinking about how those types of events impact the way that we design and plan the power grid. So with that, hopefully that kind of teed up some questions in your mind, but I'll go ahead and stop right there and turn it back over to Joe so we can get into some questions.
Thank you. Thanks to all our panelists. So folks, be prepared for asking questions, and we're ready to go. Oh, we already got a volunteer, so this is good. I can run.
Yeah.
So one thing that I noticed that almost everybody on the panel brought up was that they are looking at climate and weather constantly to determine when they make decisions such as power shutdown. Are you doing that internally with your own models created from your own employees? Are you sourcing that from somewhere else, like another private sector, a contractor? Are you sourcing that from NOAA? Is it multiple sources? And as someone who works at the university and NOAA, if it's coming from data sources like us, what more can we do to provide the information that you need to make these decisions so that not everybody is inventing their own singular wheel?
Yeah, this is James. I'll respond to that real quick. So one of the watershed events that happened with that wildfire mitigation program and the planning that goes around that and the cross-agency work, one of the key things we realized is that we actually lack key internal staff for certain things, like more meteorologists that may be focused on this topic, wildfire scientists and physicists to help us understand the effects of that and do the wildfire modeling. So we currently contract out for that kind of service with Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. And so we rely upon them to work with NOAA and the Weather Service and USGS and get those data inputs into the modeling process. But so in terms of the capability, we contract out for that currently, and having a conversation about how that could be improved from the PNNL side, I think would be a great thing to talk through. But we also realize that as a utility, we also need to think about how we hire people, bring them internal to the agency, to the utility, to be able to do this kind of work internally.
So I should have mentioned this too. So WECC itself does not own or operate any power system equipment, but we work really closely with the utilities who do. And, you know, I think one of the, I'm sure if this is pointed right, one of the trends that we've seen over the last several years is that utilities, particularly those in California, are starting to hire more climatologists, meteorologists to help them do some of what you said, you know, detect and determine when conditions are perfect for wildfires to be started. However, I also will say that, you know, from a WECC perspective, we rely on a lot of public data sources, a lot of information sources to help us paint that wide area picture of the status of reliability threats to the grid. And so we're very interested in getting information, not only like real-time situational awareness type information, but data that we can use to enhance the models that we use to plan the grid of the future. So.
And I just say, similar to what you've heard, we have a risk assessment model that is multi-layered, relying largely on publicly available data. I'm going to phone a friend because we have one of our newest employees in the room that if you have any additional information to share, and we'd get a microphone to you.
Thank you, and I'll be speaking a little later. I am new, I'm just 3 months in, so forgive my ignorance here, but I think that's certainly something that Tri-State has identified, something we want to move closer towards is getting more real-time data, more advanced specific data to help fuel, no pun intended, those wildfire models, so we can better understand those risks in real time, make those decisions, and have those kinds of actions at our disposal. I think one thing that Tri-State's doing is staffing up for that. I mean, I am proof in that very same argument because I'm the hire, right? I'm tasked to bring some things together, and I know that my immediate supervisors and I know Duane wants us to improve and grow and become more proactive. So I like some other panelists, I see our program growing dramatically.
Yeah, I think that focus on real time is the bridge to cross here. Is largely the models are static. And if we can get more real-time information, we don't have to have as big of mitigations. We don't have to affect as many people with a mitigation. Take a line out of service, for example, that might affect the ability of a customer to take electricity, which is important to their business or important to their livelihood. So, you know, just the ability to pinpoint that. Also, the quicker you can get information on a wildfire ignition, the more likely you can take action to prevent it from spreading. Thanks.
I wanted to take for just a moment, take my role as moderator to interject a few questions. First of all, one of the idea behind the energy analysis and policy program at UW is to let people, you know, students that are getting masters or BSs in meteorology or atmospheric science recognize that there's so many positions out there within the industry across the board, because not only for wildfire mitigation, but also for climate mitigation and all sorts of things, which is why we have this early career panel at the end. So I think that's an important point to know. Branden, I wanted to follow up on one of you talked about having your own situational awareness dashboard. And I'd like to ask the whole panel, to what extent is satellite data used as part of that? First of all, real-time situational awareness, but also sort of the longer term planning in terms of vegetation clearing and things like that.
Yeah, I'll start with that one. So we currently have a real-time or quasi real-time situational awareness capability from our continuity office. So that includes wildfire. It includes all other kinds of threats and issues that could be there. We do not currently have capabilities for real time when it comes to our operations side of the house. My colleagues in that side of the house are working toward getting the funding and the internal alignment to be able to push that forward in the next couple of years. So we don't currently use satellite imagery of any kind in our real-time operations when it comes to wildfire. We kind of use satellite imagery as proxy in our annual wildfire risk modeling with the lab. And then as we start iterating toward the quarterly updates and hopefully monthly and maybe even weekly updates, we'll be getting more and more into the more timely, if not quite actual real-time satellite data. But I guess to summarize it all, basically what I'm saying here is we don't currently use it. We see maturation pathways toward using that. And that's one of the key things that I'm really keen to learn here this week.
And ditto for us. So it's opportunity. Yeah.
So the question is from Christine Wiedemeyer, and what specific satellite products are you using?
That's a great question that I cannot answer because I'd have to defer to the wildfire physicists at the lab. They have all that stuff in detail. From where I sit on that project team, I don't have an in-depth knowledge of the exact products they use.
And I don't think we're using any. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Yes, not yet. So we have a very high degree of interest, though, in how we could use them.
Yeah, ditto.
Sure if Wade has anything.
Wade, do you have anything you'd like to add to this about use of satellite data currently for any of your situational awareness or longer term planning?
Yeah, let me go back to the first question. And I was just trying to think about all of them, but I think the gal that asked the first question there, my answer would have been yes, yes, and yes. We use both internal, external, private, public sources. I would say in the order in which we use them, the focus obviously for us moving forward is to bring as much situational awareness in-house and create and expand the ability to do that. We certainly can't do it all, and nor can we do it at the level at which NOAA or anybody else does it. So we do rely on those sources to either back up the decision-making process and matrix that we use internally to quantify and or justify anything that we produce internally. So it does play a significant role and will always. As far as satellite, some of the products that we use and the ones that we are onboarding through companies like Technosylva, and I'm not advertising for them, I'm just throwing it out there that they have a very advanced program that a lot of our utilities are using. And integrated into that is DOE satellite that plays a significant role in having that situational awareness. Internally, we've built a pretty robust fire intel gathering system, dashboards that we use through Esri to create situational awareness, not only for our fire mitigation team, but for our operations teams to know whether or not a fire is started and the potential and the timing of impact for us. So yes, looking forward to having the ability to use more and more of that technology as it continues to grow and figure out the most beneficial ways to incorporate it.
And I'll just add on. So for our wildfire dashboard, I'm told that we use NASA's MODIS satellite thermal hotspot data. I will also mention we have a couple of panels coming up later that are going to dig a little bit more into the details around system infrastructure and mitigation strategies. So we should have a lot of SMEs on those panels that can answer maybe some more of these in-depth questions for you as well.
Any other
questions? Yeah, currently our
dashboard
incorporates both VIIRS and MODIS, and then we marry that up with the wildfire Irwin system, and that's the way that we currently use it.
Any other questions from the audience?
Hi, I'm Joe Casola from NOAA. I'm taking things a little bit away from the fire discussion, but Branden, you had mentioned extreme heat and kind of the grid scale impacts. And several of you have probably had pretty substantial extreme heat waves in the last few years, most notably in Arizona recently. I'm curious what the discussion is both within the utility or kind of among utilities about the threat of extreme heat. You know, with wildfire, we have it's more common, I think, to have a fire mitigation plan for the utility to see it as kind of an enterprise level risk. But in NOAA's work, in my work, where we've talked with individual utilities, usually extreme heat is not as high up on the list. And I'm curious if you could just talk about kind of where your conversations are kind of internally and amongst utilities about extreme heat risks.
Just the extreme heat that we're seeing is generally within the operating range of the equipment that we operate. So it's not like we're worried it's all going to fail at, this somewhat elevated level of temperature, because we already planned for that. The times when people need us the most is the hottest days of summer and the coldest days of winter. And it's already built for that with a lot of defense in depth, redundancy built into the system so we can lose lines and still keep the power flowing. Our planning assumes lines are gone. That's the basic starting point for planning, is you take lines out of service and have to still serve loads. So because of that, now that said, as temperatures have increased, and especially with dryness, thermal fossil plants are being derated more, so they can't produce as much. If there's not as good a cooling, they don't produce as well. And solar has the same issue as it gets hotter.
And I'll add on too. So there's a lot of, I guess, pieces moving as the power system transforms. One of those moving pieces is that we're seeing a transition from a lot of baseload thermal resources to more clean energy resources, which are also very weather dependent. And so we at WECC, we analyze events on the system, and over the last 3-4 years, we've analyzed several events related to heat waves. The first one being the August 2020 heat wave event that actually did end up in California having to shed load because of resource shortfalls. Now, you look at these types of events and think, okay, how can we take that information and change the way we either operate or plan the grid? One thing we've noticed from a weather perspective is usually before these heat waves set in, the wind dies down. And so you've just lost a valuable resource to help you. Those heat waves bring a lot of high demand too. So customer demand increases quite a bit, which is probably one of the biggest impacts of the heat waves. And so you start looking at, a changing resource mix coupled with loads that we haven't seen before. And the June 2021 heat wave event was another great example, really impacted the Pacific Northwest. And they started seeing temperatures in June in the 100-degree range, which is not normal for that part of the country. And so they're having to kind of rethink, how they're going to serve their customers during those times of extremely high demand. And typically those heat waves too, they last several days, 5, 6, 7 days. And so you have to determine, okay, how are we going to make sure that we're able to serve our load 24 hours a day, 7 days a week through those heat wave events. And then I'll just mention the other piece too that's complicating factors, and this showed up in the August 2020 heat wave event, is when you get those hot temperatures, typically at the end of the day, you get some relief as the sun goes down, you start losing solar generation, but it also cools off. So you start seeing a decline in your loads, in your customer demand. Oftentimes during these heat waves, that doesn't happen. And so you have high demands as you're losing your solar generation. And so you have to figure out, okay, how am I going to serve those customers? And if it's a wide area event, oftentimes, the neighbors that you could depend on in the past may be trying to serve their own customers too. So it just creates all kinds of interesting challenges in making sure that you're able to serve your customers all the time in the midst of these heat waves and other things happening.
Hey, Wade, do you want to go? And then I'll go last.
Sure. Branden's absolutely correct, and I appreciate the broad view from the electric utilities as a whole. To answer your question, yes, we do talk about it quite a bit, and we're very concerned about it. As you mentioned, Arizona, as a state, let alone the Phoenix metropolitan area, smashed all records, not only for energy delivery, but temperatures, with I think over 35 days of 115 or greater. So yeah, there's significant impacts to us. One of the reasons why we have brought on another meteorologist to focus on specifically that area of research and support for not only fire mitigation, but for energy delivery here at APS. Just practically speaking, I'm not an engineer, so don't expect a whole lot from me in this perspective, but it was interesting to learn that even, with our record overnight lows, sometimes dipping into the 90s down in Phoenix, but hovering around 100 degrees, that when we do need to take a line out of service due to a wildfire, it has that compounding effect that everybody has talked about. It not only affects other customers that, take delivery of energy from us, but also our customers in the valley. And so it's much more delicate balance, because the only quick remedy that we have is to bring on another gas plant or increase the production of that gas plant. And it's interesting that even a half a degree of the overnight temperature makes a difference in the startup time of that gas plant during high demand periods of the day. And so studying that now, like Branden said, we have a lot of things built into the system already that allows the system to work appropriately and do that. But from an engineering perspective, it does make a difference in those overnight temperatures to bring those gas plants up.
Yeah, and from our perspective, as Duane said, it's less a concern about the assets and the operations and the capabilities of the transmission assets across our system in cases of extreme heat. It's more in the realm of our power services side, which works with the Army Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation to run the hydroelectric power plants in the Pacific Northwest region. And it's so it's on the power services side, and it's the meteorologists in that sit in that group that are thinking longer term about climate change and how that affects the snowpack, which then affects the runoff, which then affects when the energy is coming into the system, which then since it's so drastically different the past few years and decade or so as it has been historically, then we got to run the system completely differently, and so that affects it from that area. And so I know that, and kind of to be a little bit more administrative too, like all the meteorologists that we have at Bonneville Power sit in our power services side because they've been focused on the snowpack and the hydro system. So we in transmission don't actually have any official meteorologists in the transmission side of the house. We're hoping to change that eventually, but I do know that they are working with Oak Ridge National Lab through DOE, Office of Electricity, and other organizations to do this longer term climate change modeling, but from the hydro perspective, as opposed to the wildfire or even broader climate change impacts upon the transmission system. So we're just getting to the place of maturing where we're starting to bring those considerations into the transmission side.
So James just made me think of something too, if I can jump in here real quick. And that is, for decades, the power grid has been planned and designed based on historical information projected forward. I think one of the challenges that we're seeing with these climate events, with these extreme weather events, is that we're kind of entering unprecedented places. And we realize that using historical information to help us extrapolate into the future is still valuable, but it may not give us the complete picture. So I think one of the challenges as an industry, and I know a lot of the national labs are working on this, is figuring out, what are the bookends that we need to plan to in terms of extreme weather? What are the different scenarios that we need to consider in our system planning exercises? And it gets back to the data piece. And as a planner, I love data. I love information. Helps inform me what I need to be thinking about. And The other thing about the power grid is it takes a long time to build infrastructure. And so we need to be thinking 10, 20, 30 years into the future now to start getting the plans in place to help create the type of infrastructure we're going to need as we continue to see these types of climate events, as we continue to see our resource mix changing.
So I'll put on my moderator hat. Many of you talked about how your system and minds have changed over the period of time. Can you elaborate more with the growth of wildfires and climate change and heat and all these factors? How is that changing the planning phase and operations phase? Is there something you're already doing now, or you're just trying to work on projecting? Where can folks help out? What can folks know? What are you kind of working on there?
I think it's just a more forward-leaning, looking ahead to what's coming for us, and trying to be more proactive, knowing that these changes are coming and that they're becoming more frequent. So, a long time ago, we didn't have the risk assessment model, and you didn't worry about, am I going to have to take a power line out of service? That's, a decade ago. But now there's a model, and we're trying to make it more sophisticated and get better. It reminds me of work that we did, 30 years ago when I worked in the Midwest on ice loading and trying to predict when you'd have a severe ice storm. And some good climate modelers at University of Oklahoma put together a model that took a number of different factors and could predict with relative precision when there was a likelihood that ice would bring power lines down. And we could be warning the public a day in advance and saying, there's a higher risk than normal. And it was all based on specific weather conditions that led to that. Well, couldn't we, with AI, construct a model that does the same thing today with good precision to say, there's a really high risk of wildfire initiation in this specific area during these specific hours. And that lets us manage that much more tightly. We don't have to have a public safety shutoff for days. Maybe we can have it for hours and not impact people's lives so severely. I think that's where we need to go. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but it just made me think of that. So.
Yeah, one of the slides I put up there tried to get to this to a certain degree, but we're just now getting to this place where we're starting to implement this more, both on the operations and the planning side. And we, as I said, we're currently doing wildfire risk modeling that looks out to the next year, but this coming year, we want to mature that so that we're actually getting quarterly snapshots to help us, but then start to mature toward being able to look 5-10 years into the future. And my group, we have our focus on wildfire. So that's a little bit of a myopic lens through which we're looking at it. But we also want to start bringing in more of the meteorologist side perspective from our power side of the house to be able to think more in terms of broader system effects across the whole system, both power and transmission. We also, in terms of the operation side, bringing in that more of the real-time understanding of how this is affecting the system. So we're just now getting to the place where we're starting to move into this zone.
So Duane made me think of something, and I think it's important, and that is, it's interesting that a lot of these challenges that we're seeing, the extreme weather events, the challenges associated with weather-dependent resources and the changing resource mix, are also happening at a time when we have available to us fantastic technology opportunities. So like artificial intelligence, I've seen from a planning perspective, one of the big shifts has been this shift from more of a deterministic worst case scenario type planning approach to more of a stochastic probabilistic approach, where you're looking at a variety of scenarios over a huge range of conditions. You essentially get more levers to pull to see, okay, what could the impacts to the power grid be? So I think it's good that it's happening at a time when we have access to more technology, more data, more computing power, that we're also experiencing these challenges, and it's a good thing. But I have seen a significant shift in the mindset of system planners from more of that deterministic approach to stochastic. Let's look at as many possible scenarios as we can to try and understand what the possible impacts may be.
Yeah, so for us, we're deeply focused on the data-driven decisions that Branden's talking about. and making sure that we have the right data, both not only historically, but trying to forecast in the future. So we have the capability on our doorstep right now to do situational awareness real time, as well as forecasting seasonally and looking out 3 to 5 years and forecasting into the future based on historical and known data points as we move forward. So we're spending a lot of time and energy and resources on that, and really looking at it holistically. Fire mitigation is not just an effort that my group makes. Every group within our transmission, distribution, operations, and even marketing has representatives that discuss and collate all that information in regards to the wildfire risk here in Arizona.
Hi.
Yeah.
Is it on? Okay. This is Christine Wiedemeyer again from the University of Colorado. I'm coming from more of an academic research perspective, and to follow on with Joe's question and all of your planning and your research needs, how do we partner with your organizations? How do we partner with industry partners? Because a lot of the needs that you're talking about are work that we're doing. There are experts in the room that could probably address a lot of the issues that you're talking about. So how do we communicate what we're doing on the science and research side to make it applicable to what you need?
This guy. Yeah. I mean, we'd love to be partnered with, especially, a local university that's doing that work, that we can provide you with real time what our challenges are, and just partner together on how do we make better models that help us do our job better. That would be fantastic partnership.
One of the things at BPA that we're really keen on, being part of the federal government, being under DOE, and also being serving 120 plus retail utility customers and having 19 other balancing authorities that we connect with, really complex system up there in the Northwest. We're really keen on, and we don't know who it would be, whether it be Department of Energy, whether it be WECC, whether it be somebody that has that broader focus or broader purview to be able to kind of be the parent for us little children about how we do this modeling together. And then that to me would be a forum through which to bring in universities and students and academic projects into that bigger umbrella, rather than having all of us utilities doing our own thing, having to recreate all these different various wheels, but have there be some kind of cohesive, coherent, broader picture thing at the top somehow. Yeah.
Yeah, I think education and awareness is the key. I think conferences like this are fantastic because I get to hear what's going on and what's being talked about, and then I can bring that back to my shop. And WECC has an extensive stakeholder committee structure that we can also use to share information with individual utilities. But I will say there is a lot of great work going on at the academic level. We partner with the University of Utah quite a bit. We're based out of Salt Lake City, so we partner with the University of Utah quite a bit to look at specific activities and research projects that could benefit the work that we're doing. I think the national labs are another great avenue. We've got a great relationship with several of the national labs, and we use them a lot to help us derive data and information that we need, that we can then share with our stakeholder community, which includes the utilities, the regulators, developers, different types of vendors. So it's figuring out those opportunities and really just raising awareness of what's happening out there.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit too and agree with everybody. But James said, I think there's certainly a bigger collective need to work together with all utilities in this space. But Christy, I think that even on the grassroots level, APS has been really involved with the NAU, Northern Arizona University forestry program there. We have a lot of folks on my team that have graduated from there. We've been able to bring them in. We spend a lot of time kind of at that grassroots level, not only doing programmatic stuff with them that comes out of the NAU, but also even just smaller projects and getting people to better understand. We've had folks that are constantly interviewing my staff about, hey, I never even thought of a forestry degree working for a utility, and how does that work? Even there in Boulder, I've worked with Michael Kotis, professor of environmental journalism. I've been there several times to speak to his classes. I think if there's anybody in the room that, even wants to reach out to, certainly I'll just speak for myself, but I think any utility would be interested in building relationships, not only with the education folks, because truly those people are the future of who's going to be sitting in my seat someday. So we certainly would be happy to help.
We have an online question. I'll let Michael read it.
Steve, you can just unmute yourself and ask.
Excellent. Can you hear us, Steve? You there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Steve Ashbaker. I'm the Reliability Initiatives Director at WECC. I work for Branden, but I was just listening to this question probably more towards Wade than anyone, and maybe James. I know Wade talked about this past summer, 30 plus days of 110 degree or higher temperatures. And I was just curious, with all the integration of the inverter-based resources such as utility scale batteries and solar, obviously, what sort of did you experience any sort of degradation in having to derate some of your inverter-based resources due to the extreme ambient temperatures?
Yeah, so from where I sit, the best answer I can give you is yes. We did experience it. To what level, I'm not educated enough in that space to be able to answer any follow-up questions, but we certainly did. And on the battery side, we have a much smaller scale battery operation right now, but it is continuing to ramp up. So yeah, we did see impact from just about every aspect of it, and due to the heat, it was pretty significant. And the issue for us was we weren't having record temperatures just in Phoenix. We're having record temperatures everywhere. So I live in northern Arizona. I live in Prescott. We had 105 degrees here in Prescott for over a month, hovering around that 103, 105. So it wasn't just that Phoenix was experiencing it, and that's why we saw record energy delivery across our entire system, even on weekends where typically we wouldn't have that. So it's very interesting.
I think we have chance for one more question from the audience.
This is Rajesh Kumar from NCAR. So I see that you use a lot of public data in your operations. So it comes at predefined spatial and temporal resolutions. So does that meet your needs, or do you wish there was a much more better tailoring of the public data to your needs?
Yes, absolutely.
And Steve Ashbaker, who just spoke up, he's going to be on a later panel. I might leave that question for him. Just kind of throw it up there. He's got a lot more familiarity with more of the specifics of the data that we use.
Wade, do you want to answer that? I'll go next.
I don't have a whole lot to add in that space. I know we've struggled with it. It's I think the biggest thing with the technology that we have, temporal spatial stuff, is this still the need to go out and verify. Actually still need a human out in the field in most cases to verify what we're seeing. So I think the better resolution that we can get, and I think part of that is the ability to digest it on our sides and having our technology catch up with what is out there, but also the ability to to bring that in at the highest level that we possibly can, to reduce the false positives, to reduce the amount of roll truck foot work that still needs to be done to verify, but it's getting there.
Yeah, and from BPA's perspective, I'll definitely agree with everything that's been said so far, and add this part, which I'm going to be paraphrasing from the operations side, my colleagues in the operations side. But one of the big challenges that we currently have from that perspective is putting yet another screen or another tool or another widget, what have you, in the control centers for the operators to actually have to interact with. Not wanting to do that unless it's super streamlined, super effective for them, meets their needs. And so we currently, one of the big challenges we have is in that space is not so much the resolution of the data so much, but what kind of new tools can we bring in that will actually be a benefit to those folks who are actually running the system.
Okay, well, first of all, let's thank all the panelists. This is perfect in terms of kind of a broad discussion of the issues, and even with the questions toward the end. So after our community impacts one, which gets at what we all care about very much, is how are we impacting our customers and the community. Then we'll have the observation ones panel where we'll be able to address a lot of these kind of questions about what's out there in terms of a satellite perspective, what's available, and what's being done in terms of new development of technologies there. So we should be ready for the coffee break.